Hello, and welcome back to another ATA Politics live stream. ATA standing for Australian Taxpayers Alliance. They're the ones that allow us to put this together. There you go, down the bottom, taxpayers.org.au. Go there, check it out, have a look at our campaigns. If you're interested, top right corner, membership, click the button, become a member. But anyway, that's ATA, and as an organization,
we're not interested either. So,
I don't want to just go to sleep now. Let's just turn it off. Yeah. No. So ATA, that's where Brian and I work, and we put on these politics live streams every Monday and Thursday, 8 p.m. Sydney and Melbourne time. Every other jurisdiction can work out your own time. And we've been doing this in the lead up to the federal election. Got less than 2 months to go. Part of it is that there's the election going on, and there's so little discussion of serious policy reform, especially tax reform. Taxpayers Alliance, you might be able to guess, one of our interests. So we're here to try and firstly just talk smack about politics and have fun about the politics as well, and then try to introduce a bit of serious policy discussion, not just sort of motherhood, bad things are bad, good things are good. I mean, I'm sure we'll say that too, but something a bit deeper in these chats. So we're gonna, Brian Marlow, my co-host here. I never know what side you're on once this comes out. Brian, how you doing?
Good, mate. Good. Just as I say, live stream, I just want this election done with. It's boring.
Well, it's because they're not taking out policy ideas. Once they take out policy ideas, I'm sure it'll get much more spicy. Now, this is live streamed, and it is simulcast to YouTube, Facebook, and X. I'm slowly getting used to calling it X, X/Twitter. If you're watching along, please give it a like. Please give it a share. Please go and find our pages on Facebook, YouTube, and X, both the Australian Taxpayers Alliance and John Humphreys. And it doesn't simulcast through to Brian's accounts, but go find Brian anyway. I mean, it's he's good crack. So go find us all, like, follow, share, and feel free to then comment and chat as we're going. We can see your comments as they come in, and sometimes we ignore them, and sometimes we get quite into it and go back and forth and end up wasting most of the whole live stream just debating with some schmuck online who keeps throwing eggs at us. So feel free to come and throw eggs, tomatoes, or agree, or just say whatever you like. Discuss Brian's lack of a beard, as was the big topic for our last one. Anyway, Brian, I was going to say, speaking of your lack of a beard, I don't know how to segue that at all, but what is happening in politics?
Well, I guess from lack of a beard, it's kind of to lack of policy. Like, there's just, we're a little bit less than a week out from the budget being dropped. So I think 6 days out from the federal budget being dropped, and then a week out from the alternative budget that will be put up by the coalition. And everything just feels stagnant right now. There's no real policy talk. It's not just policy talk. I understand a hesitation to talk about policy until you've announced your budget. You tell voters what you're going to do with your election budget. The opposition tells them what they're going to do with their election budget, and then you sort of fight it out. But you should use this time to set a fucking vision. And I'm not seeing a lot of that at the moment. There's attempts. Peter has attempted to sort of touch the third rail on some potentially, conservative / sort of new Australian right-wing issues. And then there's just sort of disunity within the coalition on those sorts of things. And what's coming out of Labor? Like, I haven't seen anything. No agenda setting, no sort of setting a vision or painting a vision for Australian voters. And it just, sure, maybe I'm in the weeds here. It's probably because we're just sort of at that pause and reset stage before you go to budget and then sort of launch your campaign. But I'm of the mindset that you need to be campaigning 6 months out from election date, and you just keep building on it. And every single day you build. Whereas there's this like ebb and flow, and it kind of, I don't think that Australian voters get engaged in that anymore. I think that, for better or worse, we see election campaigns that are happening globally, and our mindsets are now used to the idea of longer election campaigns. So,
yeah, you make a good point about we're just out from the budget. So, of course, both the government's probably going to be holding fire to announce things in the budget, and the opposition's holding fire to see what the government does in the budget. So it's probably a uniquely bad time to be doing a politics live stream. Nonetheless, we do commit Monday and Thursday, so we do it going forward anyway. I mean, the government did announce what they're going to spend more on defense. And I mean, I don't have a huge amount to say on that, except to note that both the government and the opposition, they always say they're too skint to provide any tax cuts, but they always find money to do nearly everything else on earth except tax cuts. So
yeah, exactly. I'm not, I'm not that opposed to increasing defense spending in Australia. Sure, whatever. If we spend it right, we can actually, strengthen our nation. But there's always this feedback loop from both sides of politics, which is, we can't cut revenue because otherwise we'll be in a budget deficit. It's like, okay, but you're just increasing spending like here, there, and everywhere. So, like, for the conservative side, my argument is net zero is dead. The Trump administration said we're walking away from this. I think I saw that Donald Trump saying that they're going to reopen hundreds of coal plants in the country. Why can't we do that? Why can't we walk away from those climate agreements and say, no, we're not going to sink billions of dollars into, wind farms and solar panels. And with those savings, we're going to give it back to Australian families. We can.
Well, I mean, of course, we technically could, but we've discussed this before, that the zeitgeist doesn't seem to have reached Australia. I mean, other countries are changing. It's happening nearly everywhere except Australia.
But
something's holding us back, and it'd be nice to think it is happening here. Maybe it is. Maybe it's starting to happen. I mean, I think One Nation is up in the polls. Maybe that's a sort of a leading indicator of something starting to happen. But the last WA election was a thumping victory for Labor. Greens went up again. And the minor right over there didn't do very well, which I mean, that's only one data point. There'll be other
part of
data
that's
points.
because Libby Mettam, who was leading the Liberal Party, is useless, and they learnt nothing from the last WA state election. So cast your mind back to the last WA state election where the Liberals ran against Mark McGowan, and they ran on a campaign of, we're going to lose, but please make sure we don't lose too much, and also we'll do everything Mark McGowan wants to do, but gay. And I think they got 2 people up.
Was it 2 in the lower house? I think that's right. Yes, and then
the National Party had more MPs than the Liberal Party over there.
I think that was right. I think the Nats originally got 4 and the Libs got 2, so the Nats were made opposition leader, and they still were up until this most recent WA election. One of the Nats then quit the National Party and joined the Libs, so then it was 3-3. But you can imagine the party room where they're trying to work out the leader. They had one of those 2 as the leader. They resigned, and I get, who's going to be the next leader? There's only one other person. I mean, it made it easy.
The only 2 guys that got up in WA at the McGowan election were sort of 2 that were further to the right. So you think that would teach you a lesson, which is that your base wants that. Then they picked Libby Mettam to be the opposition leader, who then basically just ran on a Zach Kirkup style campaign of, oh, well, we're probably going to lose, but please make sure we don't lose too badly. And then they only got 5 people up. So it just, the incentive is clearly there, and the evidence is clearly there, which is you are a centre-right party, so pivot to the right.
Look, I think that's the right thing to do, because I think eventually the zeitgeist must shift, and when it does, you want to be leading that zeitgeist shift. But I mean, the fact that WA still voted like 60% left-wing, it does not tell me that there's a huge block of people asking for the Libs to go. I want them to do what you're saying. I think they too often think that they need to follow, whereas I think they should lead.
But I understand what you're saying. But if you're a sort of non-committal voter and you don't really care that much, but maybe you could vote for a Liberal Party because they're going to offer you tax cuts or something like that, and then you go and spend 30 seconds looking up who your local candidate is, and your local candidate says, oh, well, I'm probably going to lose, but please make sure I don't lose too much, and I'm going to do everything that those guys over there do, but I'm going to wear a blue tie. Well, you just go, then I'll just go with them.
I also think they make the mistake, and this is an easy mistake to make if you're a political insider. You start seeing things along the spectrum of politics, and you think, well, we've got, if someone's further to the right of the Liberals, are they going to preference Labor over Liberal? They assume probably not. So you're going to get their vote. It's compulsory preferential in most jurisdictions and compulsory voting. And so then they think, well, we need to pick up more votes. Those extra votes are in the center. What can we do to get those centrists away from the other side? Which makes a lot of sense as far as it goes. I think the thing that political hacks and insiders miss
So
is
that doesn't happen.
a lot of what they call the center aren't, well, the swing voters. A lot of swing voters aren't swing voters because they're ideologically centrist. They're not really ideological at all. They're up for grabs if you just interest them, excite them, put something in front of them that's worth paying attention to. So they could be people that are currently voting all over the shop. Clive Palmer, Greens, this Labor guy looks interesting. You don't just pitch to them by getting closer to Labor. You pitch them by being more interesting and leading the way.
Right. People are no longer voting, or when I say no longer, I'm generalizing here. A lot of people are no longer voting based on ideological grounds. They're voting based on their own self-interests. So offer them things, as you said, that are interesting to them. And what I've been proposing is that you offer them, tax cuts as opposed to handouts, because I believe that your average swing voter that's not ideologically aligned, who could go either way, they're numb to handouts. There's been handouts for the last 15 years on a whole bunch of other, like a whole raft of things. It doesn't matter anymore. But saying to them, actually, you get to keep your own money and you get to do what you want with it, I think that's way more powerful.
So I was somewhat convinced by the argument in there's a fabulous book called The Myth of the Rational Voter by Brian Kaplan. And if you're interested in really understanding what's going on underneath politics, highly recommend it, The Myth of the Rational Voter. But in one section, one chapter of that, he looked into this, what is the motivator of people as they vote? And most people as they vote believe they are voting in the national interest. Now, they often perceive the national interest as just magically, coincidentally having a lot of overlap in what happens to be very good for them personally. But the motivation that they see inside themselves generally isn't, oh, I want shit, give me stuff. It's, oh, this is good for the country. And it just so happened, like I'm a nurse, and what's good for the country is we need more funding for nurses. And they don't think of themselves as thinking I'm being nepotistic. They think of themselves as thinking, I see the shortage in nurses, I'm trying to do what's good for the country. So when you wrap up a policy, I agree, you want to try and give people something that's good for them, but make sure it's also good for the country, which again is why I think tax cuts that really work for this, because this country is in a productivity slump. As I rant on every time the national accounts come out, productivity is the same level it is now as it was 8 years ago. Exactly. Right? So the GDP per hour work, the amount you're getting paid for the work you do hasn't increased for over 8 years now. And if we ever want that to increase, we can't just kumbaya. We can't hand out our way to greater prosperity. We have to kickstart the economy, and there's only a few ways to do it, and the most obvious is tax cuts. So that's actually good for the country, and of course it's good for the person getting the tax cut. So you've got the double whammy there, where you can just talk about it as this is good for the country, and people can go, oh, I'm voting for what's good for the country. Oh, and look, I've got money in my pocket. Kind of win-win.
Right. And that goes back to what we're discussing at the beginning of this stream, which is you have to paint a picture for the voters, right? So if I was the coalition, I would obviously be pushing family tax cuts, but then I would paint the picture as to why this is good for the country, not just good for the family or the individual family. And we're just in this sort of lull before budget time where I don't know, people just seem to think, oh, well, you pause and you wait and you wait for policy announcements to come out, and then you attack the bad ones, and then you signal your better ones, and spend another week promoting that in the post-budget, and then call an election after that. No, well,
that's what we're going to
be campaigning. Always be painting a picture every single day until you're blue in the face. You work in politics. Your job is to convince the Australian public that your vision is better than the other guy's vision. And to do that, you need to fucking repeat this day in, day out until you hate hearing it. And then once you're at the point where you hate hearing it, you then keep doing it. And, we live and breathe this stuff. So I understand for some people it might sound insane, but that is what works.
Yes, unfortunately, because it's very boring for us, but it's that is the way to get it done. Just to answer this question, look, if you work out what's in people's self-interest, you'll have a very good guide for how they're probably going to end up voting. But if you ask those people their motivations, and I think this is true, this makes sense to me. Most people don't wake up in the morning and think, oh, I'm a selfish asshole that's trying to screw the country just to get a few more dollars in my pocket. Very few people would sleep comfortably at night if that was their vision of themselves. So nearly everyone has a mental model in their head of how what happens to be good for them is also a good thing. So if you just walk, I gave that example before of nurses tend to support greater spending on nurses, but very few of them think that their motivation is self-interest. Yeah, they go to work, they see the shortage of nurses, they see some nurses having to work too hard, they see a problem in the hospital, and they are acutely aware of all problems associated with not enough nurses. And so they'll say, for the good of this country, we need more nurses. Now, it just so happens that nearly everything people say happens to be conveniently good for them. But if you walk up to them and say, oh, no, you're self-interested about the nurses thing. Here, why don't you be self-interested about this other thing? That's probably not going to successfully shift their vote because their internal model of themselves isn't self-interest. So it's good to be aware that what they do is probably going to be ultimately self-interested. But if you're trying to convince them, then you have to be aware of what they think they're doing. So it's like a two-level argument. I think that's the way to go anyway. I've been wrong before. It was a Tuesday. Very traumatizing.
Yeah.
So there's, Brian, I believe you have an X post. See, I'm getting better. Didn't call it a tweet. An X post that's got a bit of love. You want to, should we have a look at that?
Yeah. I mean, I guess this is sort of goes back to the whole painting a picture thing, right? So it's very simple. Get a John Williamson song, slap some nostalgic footage over it, and then, suggest that maybe Australia can return to what it once was, which I think is entirely...
wait, this is a video in it, does it? Wait a second. Should I...
It's got a video at the bottom.
Oh, should we play this? I don't know if we can play it. How does this work?
Play the video. Yeah, click it. Let's see what happens.
Why would we increase migration by 700,000 when we can't look after the people we have here?
My true blue, don't say you've gone.
Cinema.
We've got 122,000 homeless in Australia.
Say you've knocked off for a smoker.
We don't have enough houses. We don't have enough support structure.
Hey, true blue.
Australia was the lucky country. Australia still is the lucky country, but it won't stay that way.
Authorised by B. Marlowe, ATA Sydney.
Why?
And that's the key. So I think that's the key thing, which is Australia was a lucky country and it still is a lucky country, but it won't be if we keep going down the current path. That's how you paint a picture. Now, if you just want to go to the bottom, we can. The blurb doesn't really matter. I can talk to that later. But if you go down to the very bottom of it, all the way down, you'll see the metrics of it, right? 50,000 views, 1,200 likes, a whole bunch of shares, zero spend behind this. That's all organic, right? And, X is not the real world, but X does have a lot of capture of the sort of, political world within Australia and globally. And it goes back to what we're talking about, which is you need to paint a picture. Now, the picture here is that Australia is struggling under the current government and their policies, and Australia is a lucky country, and we can go back to that, but it won't be lucky anymore if we allow this stuff to continue. There needs to be more of that, and this ebb and flow campaigning that I see from both sides. This isn't a coalition issue. This isn't a Labor issue. It's not even the minor party issue. Everyone kind of follows each other on this, and I just completely disagree. Is keep painting the picture, keep propagandizing, and get out there and push it. Whatever your issue it might be. If you're a Labor government, your issue is we want to make Australia, lame and cringe. Fine. Advocate for it every single day.
I kind of feel like they have been advocating for that every single day. That's the one thing they're very good at. Fair enough. I think we did mention the budget coming up. That's probably the big political news that's happening at the moment. This is a bit boffening, but maybe worthwhile touching on. Let's see if I can bring this up. That work? Oh, I didn't actually bring it up, did I? Yeah, this is just a bit of pre-commentary about the budget coming up. I thought it was worth. I had a quick look at the data coming in for this year, so the 24-25 financial year that we're currently in. You can get a bit of a precursor. You can look at where the budget's trending if you know where to look around on the Department of Defense Finance website. So I thought I'd have a little look, and income tax revenue is actually currently running 3.7 billion ahead of forecast. Right, so that's interesting to note. It raises the question of what they're going to do with that 3.7. I gave three options. Recognize that taxes are already too high, and give us tax cuts. Right, plug for the ATA here, saying we've got some suggestions. So come and check out our suggestions. That's one thing they could do. I mean, if income tax comes in higher than they expected, they could just give it back to us. It was our money. We the workers are the ones who earned it. If you accidentally took too much, give it back, you bastard. But anyway, that's one option. The second option is not economically irresponsible, right? It's what a lot of people would probably be thinking. The budget is in deficit. I think they're expecting a $20 billion or so $billion deficit. So they could take this extra money they've got from us and just pocket it and
Pay the deficit.
have
Yeah.
a smaller deficit, right? So that's it's not what I think is the priority now. As I said before, 8 years of productivity stagnation, in part caused by stifling regulation, but also this ever increase in income tax due to bracket creep that's only been partly given back. So that's one of the causes. I think something needs to be done. I think tax reform is getting to the point where it's just more important than the balanced budget at this point. So I'd argue for number one, but if someone argued for number two, I wouldn't think they're crazy. They're just a person with a slightly different priority between macro and microeconomics. So fine. And of course, there's the third option. They got a bunch more money, and instead of giving it back to us to kickstart the economy or paying down the debt, they could just blow it all on pre-election handouts. So now, of course, we haven't seen the budget yet. And I don't know if that, the extra income tax revenue, if that'll flow through because there's a few more months to go. But I ask people to consider what do you think is the more likely option here? Which is the better one? I say number one. And what's more likely to happen? I think what they're currently doing, and this is going from the economics to the politics of the situation. It's a very common thing pre-budget for the treasurer or some people from the government to come out and say, "Oh, look, this is going to be a tough budget. It's going to be really harsh. We're going to have a big deficit, and we're going to have to hurt everyone." And now everyone's kind of been primed for that, right? They're setting expectations. Then they walk in, and then they say, "Oh, I'll tell you what. There's a handout for you. There's a handout for you. There's a handout, like the Oprah Winfrey, a handout for everyone. And look, our budget balance is better." So I think if they've got a $4 billion of extra revenue that they didn't earn and don't deserve, I suspect they'll waste $3 billion of that and say, "Look, we improved the budget while giving you handouts. Look how responsible we are." And of course, they're not responsible. They just got free money, and then they set expectations. The media went along with it because, of course, the media and Labor Party are often of a like mind. And it's very cynical. And so I just wanted to put this out there now. I don't know if it'll be correct, but if it is, then I'll be able to say, look, it wasn't magic what they did. They just sat on some free money.
Well, I think you're right. I think option 3 is the most likely outcome. I think there'll also be a hybrid of option 3, which is, don't forget, you can always just lie, right? So you can just sort of fudge some of your projections as well. So your projected revenue earnings, and you can go, well, if coal exports hit $11 billion a ton, then we'll have a massive surplus over the forward estimates. And if every single Uber driver actually pays tax instead of sending their income back to India via remittances, well, then we'll generate more revenue. And now that's how we've got a balanced budget and can give you, a fucking flat screen and TV every house. And I think you're right. I'm seeing articles in conservative papers saying, "Oh, it looks like the budget's going to be awful. Well, we've heard whispers that it's screwed." It's like, well, where are those whispers coming from? Because if they're coming from labor sources, then they're leading you down a garden path.
Yes, indeed. Look, I don't know I don't think there's too much out and out lying about the economic assumptions. But what they definitely do is they play these tricks with the budget because a lot of people don't understand how a budget's put together. And why would you? Like, who would want to? But there are some things that fall off budget. For instance, you may remember, let's just bring back our faces. We don't need to keep looking at that. You may remember they announced recently, the Labor government, that they were going to laugh off some HEX debt. Right, so a bunch of people owe some money in HEX, and then they've cut it by 20%, and they're campaigning on that. That's part of the Labor ad that I see just repeating and cycling around YouTube. Now that doesn't show up on the budget, so that's actually got a big impact on the government's balance sheet. Like, it's blowing, it's making us further in debt. But there are various things they can do that don't show up on the budget. I wonder. I don't know if you saw recently, Labor's announced they're going to start giving us more loans. $3,000 loans, I think it is, to pay for groceries.
A loan,
something like that. A loan, yes. And part of me wonders whether
is this like Afterpay, but it'll be government run, so it'll just like.
Well, I haven't seen the details, but part of me wonders whether they're setting it up as a loan so that it goes off budget. So they could potentially set it up as a loan, goes off budget, then they can forgive the loan, and then they've managed to do a handout, and it never shows up on the budget, right? It shows up in debt,
right?
Fine,
which is like, I fixed it in a way that you'll find out at the next budget, right?
But it wouldn't even show up in the next budget, right? So it's
oh, really? Okay, run me through it again. How would it work?
Hell's no, I'm not ready to get through the details of how they put the budget together, but there are various things that don't show up on the budget. It also depends how you budget, right? So some of these things would show up if you did fiscal budgeting instead of cash budgeting, but it's and And there are different tricks that you can do in different ways, and without spending half the day staring at them, I forget half of them. So trust, like I could look if there's demand, right in right now. If you want me to do a deep dive into the different ways they trick you with the budget, maybe next Monday.
Look, just on that one example, I want you to run me through it, because
I'd need to have the balance sheet in front of me to be able to point to the things that are in and out and how they can change them. But look, our next session is Monday. That's before the budget. If I get 3 people asking in the chat, come on, 3, you can do it yourself, Brian, right in there. If we get 3 people asking for it, then I will on Monday, as preparation for the Tuesday budget, bring up the budget papers on screen here, talk you through the little tricks they do, what's included in the headline cash balance, the underlying cash balance, the actual change in net debt. Those are the 3 that show up on cash budgeting, or when you do fiscal budgeting. But I'm not going to be able to do that very effectively now. I didn't prep it to have it up on the screen. I've got one person saying yes, so I think I'm off the hook now. What's that?
I was saying, how dare you not just have it immediately ready?
Checking the messages. People seem to resent the broken promise of 275. We are getting outs. They just didn't fix the underlying problem. Sorry, say again.
Yeah, I mean, people are pessimistic, sure, but never underestimate the ability of voters to go, oh no, this time they're serious, because Jim Chalmers had a serious face when he announced it, and then everyone nodded and applauded behind him. Because that's what happens, right? Like Jim Chalmers, when he drops a budget, he'll be like, we care about Australian families, and we're going to give $11 bazillion for a new PlayStation in every household. And then everyone in the back is going, here. And it works. My mum will sit there and she'll look at that and go, oh, isn't that nice? Everyone seems so committed. They're all nodding their heads.
Yeah, I think this point coming up here, the last one, I was just rotating through some of the messages. I'm not sure this is going to play well politically, or play as well as they think it will. It looks pretty dire if you're lending people a few $100s to be able to eat and say, look, we've been running the economy and the economy's going great. But by the way, if you want to survive, here, I'll give you a loan. It's a bit of a mixed message. Look, the tyrant's back in town here, and he wants me to do the budget run through. I haven't hit 3 people asking for it yet, Brian. You haven't gone and put a message on the social media.
I haven't got the.
We got to 2. Ryan Burns. G'day, Ryan. Good to see you. Yeah, it's not even lying. I mean, they're technically following the rules. The trick is that once you know the rules, and then once you know what it is that the public's going to pay attention to, then you can just set things up in such a way as that what you're doing doesn't show up in what they're paying attention to. And it's also, you saw this with the last budget when they did this HEX write-off. The fiscal balance blew out, right? The fiscal balance, we're in a deficit now of $20-something billion on cash, which is what everyone reports. The fiscal deficit, which does catch that change they made, is 40 something billion. So it's if they know what you're paying attention to, and it normally, because most journalists don't understand this stuff, right? I mean, they act very sort of pompous and wankery on TV, very authoritative. Yes, this is the answer. They're just reading off a press release. They don't understand most of the words they're saying. That's not true for all of them.
The press release has been copy pasted and then reinterpreted by a 22-year-old intern who doesn't give a shit about their job.
Well, and the government knows very well. They've got some very smart bureaucrats there. I mean, they're, in my opinion, often the baddies, but that doesn't mean they're not intelligent. And they know how to have framed these things. So they'll pass on the cash balance. They'll say, this is the budget balance. And the journalists will write, oh, yes, this is the budget. Another trick they've done recently, which I found it remarkable they get away with it. In nearly every budget I've been following, I used to work in budget policy area in the Treasury. That was my first real job when I got out of uni. And we used to put together, I was working in putting together the budget. And when you release a budget, like right now, the focus would be 25, 26, right? Because 24, 25, the financial year we're currently in, is nearly over. There's nothing really we can do for this year, right? So this is the 25, 26 budget. This is the budget preparing for the next financial year coming. So the focus was always on the coming year. The last couple of years, the government's just focused on the year that was just finishing. And everyone in the media just went, oh, okay, yeah, well, I guess that's the budget year now. And they did that because the years that were just ending were in surplus. The years that were coming were in deficit. And so they just decided to say, oh, don't look at the budget year. Look at a different year. That's a really good story for us. And as far as I could tell, That's what every journalist did. Every journalist just went, yeah, well, okay, sure. Look, that Howard government did a bit of a trick like this as well. I mentioned before, you got a cash balance and you've got a fiscal balance. And they switched to fiscal balance and they made a big song and dance. This is a much better system. This is a much better way of doing it. And then one year, Howard had a string of surpluses. In 1 year, he had a fiscal deficit and a cash surplus. And that year, they just quietly shifted back to reporting the cash balance. And everyone in the media just mindlessly reported the cash balance. And no one seemed to pick up that they just said you should have a fiscal balance. Fiscal is in deficit. You'd think, I mean, the journalists aren't big fans of the Liberal Party. If they had a chance to kick them, they would, if they understood. But so I assume this means they just don't really understand. But anyway, look, I'm getting ahead. I should have done all this on Monday. On Monday, all right. So that's what we won't have a new tax policy on Monday. Instead, we will be doing a deep dive in how budgets do, because we've got 2.5 requests so far. So if I get another half a request,
I'm requesting it verbally. So there you go.
Yeah, that's what I counted as half.
Well, I've asked this a few times in different, company and formats as well, and people ask people act like I'm calling their baby ugly or something. Given the state of everything right now, what would be so bad if the coalition said, no, we're not delivering a deficit because we're going to give tax cuts to families, and right now that's more important.
You mean not delivering a surplus?
No, so we're not delivering a surplus, and we're not balancing the budget this time around because we will give tax cuts to families, and that's more important. And it's more important for X, Y, Z reasons. What's so bad about that? I'm sorry.
Well, I agree. There's two sides to this. Look, I agree with you. I actually think that's where we are. I think that's where we are politically and economically. I think economically right now, productivity reform trumps balancing the budget. We need to do both. But in terms of priority, I'm with you. But also in terms of politics, and we've seen this around the world. It was about 20 years ago that in America, and this also, in explaining this, will say what the danger is in this approach. About 20 years ago in America, both Democrats and Republicans worked out that no one really cares about the budget balance anymore. So if one side promises to balance the budget and the other side promises to give you something, the more generous party wins, politically speaking. If they just said, don't worry, we'll fix the budget later. Don't worry. In the meantime, if you're a Democrat, here's a handout. If you're a Republican, here's a tax cut. And it just kept working. Now, in Australia, we've still got this mindset, especially the Liberal Party has this idea that they've got an advantage in the polls. If anyone thinks economics, they think Liberal Party better. And most people don't really understand economics, so they just think all that means is balancing a budget, which is that's one half of macroeconomics. But quite frankly, macroeconomics is the fake economics anyway. I mean, microeconomics is where it really matters. And it's not even all of macroeconomics, so it's clearly not all of the story. But it's all of the story that a journalist can easily print. They can work out, is the number positive, is the number negative, is the number big, is the number small. So it's quite easy to explain in that way. And so it's often the focus, and the Liberals think, well, we've got a reputation for doing it better. So that means we're able to really go after Labor for not doing it. And so I think they're just scared of losing that advantage. I think it's misguided because I think most people just think, the Liberals are better at economics, whatever that means. And they don't really know. It's somewhat unfair, but it works both sides. Everyone just thinks that Labor is better at health policy, and they don't really know. So if the Labor Party had a policy of just compulsory cancer for everyone, and the Liberal Party cured cancer, and then you just polled the public, there would still probably be a majority saying, "Oh, Labor's better on health," because it's kind of an instinctive vibe that you can do nothing about. And I think that's the same with the economy. But the Liberals are scared of losing their reputation. But I think the reputation for running an economy that grows with high productivity, that should be the litmus test. Not numbers on in a document. So I agree with you. I think the priority should be now. They don't want to blow out the budget. By the way, just to finish, the sting in the tail there is now America has had 20 years of large and growing deficits. Their debt is getting insane. If they keep on this trajectory, their country will end. I mean, the land will technically be there, but people will eventually go off the US dollar and there'll be a global war and it'll be very ugly.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the solution for America, right? Like they're like, well, our debt's backed by the fact that we can kick a lot of ass. So I
don't know if they're going to win that war. I mean, after they lose,
I'm not saying they will. I'm just saying that there seems to be this mindset in America, which is, well, we can just keep increasing the debt ceiling because if anyone really wants to call to collect, we'll just bomb the crap out of them. It's like, well,
it's not even that. They print the money, right? And anywhere else in the world, you print too much money, you get runaway inflation quite quickly. like everywhere, literally everywhere else in the world. In America, they have that issue, but it's significantly less because they can print a bunch of money each year and send it off to other countries who take it and put it in their vaults and use it on the balance sheet of their reserve banks. Right? Every country in the world will have US dollars on their books as part of the assets they hold. So every year the US gets to just print some money, send it overseas. It costs like 1 cent to print a $100 note. They don't even print the notes, right? They just send it electronically, but it makes it easier to think about it. It costs 1 cent to print a $100 note. You send that $100 note over to Australia. We hand them 150 Australian dollars. So they've now got 150 real Australian dollars they can buy stuff with, and it costs them 1 cent. And then we just put the $100 US note in the reserve bank. Right. And again, it's not really the notes. It's all electronic these days, but you get the idea. So America's able to print a metric shit ton. That's a technical economic term, a metric shit ton of money that doesn't cause them inflation because it just goes into other countries only because they've got the reserve currency of the world. If they lost that, their system would come crashing down very quickly. So there's, people point out that it's not just future wars we're talking about. There happens to be a remarkable correlation between any country that decides to. I might go off the American dollar, and then remarkably, about a week after they say that, they discover that there are a lot of terrorists in that country that really need some re-education. So there's a lot of
bit
of a correlation
popping up all around the Middle East as soon as someone says, "Oh, well, I might walk away from this." Anyway, we won't get too much into geopolitics, but it's very curious. Obviously, correlation is not causation, but
yeah. Anyway, so that's I'm going to come back to the budget on Monday. That's a nice idea. So all right, I'll put a pin in that for now. We'll do the rest of the budget chat on Monday. The budget's on Tuesday. That's 5 days away. Now, speaking of remarkable coincidences, so how's this for a segue? Apparently, caravans in Sydney to blow themselves up these days. Or have you followed that situation?
No. Say that again.
You have followed it. You just weren't paying attention. Come on, stop in. Caravans in New South Wales. Caravans full of bombs and letters to synagogues.
You mean the giant hoax that was fake and was clearly fake from the very beginning, and everyone knew that it was a hoax, except for somehow, every single policymaker and law enforcement official. Well, actually,
no one wanted to say it.
A bunch of law enforcement officials knew from the beginning that it was a fucking hoax.
No one wanted to say it aloud, right? I mean, very few people with any sort of audience wanted to admit to the possibility. I think a lot of people were sitting there going, wait a second. But if no one else had said it yet, they didn't want to say it yet. So everyone kind of did this, that Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing at each other, waiting.
And that's all fine until the point that we pass laws that ban words, right? And that's where we're at. And now everyone agrees that these laws were based off a lie, but we're still going to keep the laws anyway.
Yes, that's Liberals in New South Wales have just come out and said, no, because Labor immediately said, no, we're keeping them anyway.
We're going to have an inquiry into how we were lied to into backing, restriction on words. But once the inquiry is done, we're still going to support the fact that we banned words because of a lie.
Yeah, well, Labor opposed the inquiry, so they didn't want the inquiry, but Liberals in the crossbench has made it happen. So there will be an inquiry. The Liberals backed the inquiry, but then preemptively said, regardless of what the inquiry says, we'll keep the sort of the hate laws that we voted for based on a lie. And what mind-boggling about this, and a few people have pointed it out, but not enough, and this should be more widely understood. We're old enough to remember the furor about 18C. I mean, this is what New South Wales government passed on the back of this hoax is 18C on steroids. So I can understand why Labor might want that.
I'm at the point where
part of their DNA.
I'm at the point where I would consider it a huge win if we could just go back to 18C.
But 18C can't put you in jail. Now, they can give you a big fine, and that's not great. They shouldn't give you a big fine. I mean, speaking controversially about racial issues, it can nearly always be controversial, but people should be able to do that in a free society. It used to be that if you spoke the wrong way about racial issues, you could get slapped with a fine. Now you can go to jail. I mean, that's one level up. And the Liberals said, 18C, I don't know, it might be going too far. Maybe we support it. No, I think it's going too far. Maybe we'll repeal it. At least they were in the conversation. I mean, Abbott was supposedly against it. Morrison was supposedly against it before. I don't think he has any actual principles or opinions, but he said he was at one stage.
For it, but yeah.
But at least they were two minds. And now they say, look, I'm not sure about that, but something that is much, much stricter, much, much worse. Oh yeah, we're for that. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and when you
that
tell them,
makes sense.
well, it was brought in because of a lie, they say, well, that's awful. We should have an inquiry. Okay, will the inquiry help you inform whether or not you then change your policy position? Oh no, we're not going to change our policy position. We just want to know how we were lied to.
Now, they obviously want the inquiry just to maximise the amount of embarrassment for the Labor parties, but that's fine. If that's their motivation, at least we get the inquiry. But it is also, I think Latham pointed out in Parliament today, it was quite remarkable in the lead up to them introducing these strict new anti-speech laws. There was a lot of anti-Semitic attacks. And then the day after the laws were introduced, they're gone. Whoosh. No more anti-Semitic attacks. I mean, that shows the laws worked, right? Every anti-Semite stopped being an anti-Semite the day after the laws were passed. Hallelujah, we fixed the problem. But yes, it does kind of go to show the farcical nature of our political system. And look, and this was a constant theme in
like with these anti-Semitic attacks, and some of the examples that were pointed to as reasons as to why we need some new magical law. We already had existing laws in place to deal with that. What we have are lazy, police, overwhelmed law enforcement, and corrupt judges, or I would say ideologically corrupt, who don't want to enforce those laws. And now all of a sudden we need to pass new sweeping legislation that won't combat the actual issues that it's meant to combat. But will be used to silence dissent on a whole raft of issues. It's insane.
I actually think there's a far greater chance that these laws are going to increase anti-Semitism than decrease. Well, firstly, the throwaway line that I've enjoyed saying quite a lot, I'll say it again, and I've got Ruddock to say it a few times now in Parliament, so hopefully people eventually hear it. Anti-Semitism wasn't caused by too much free speech, so it can't be fixed by taking away free speech.
Exactly.
And just, wording it like that, I mean, are they really arguing that anti-Semitism is caused by too much free speech? I mean, it seems.
Well, Chris Minns is out there.
It seems idiotic on that front. But just to finish the thought, I don't think this is going to decrease anti-Semitism, but it could well increase it. If people out there are upset at these laws and Labor and Liberals say, oh, we had to do it, we had to do it for the Jews, how is that going to by feel about Jewish people? I mean, this doesn't seem like a smart.
It plays into a whole raft of narratives that are spread by actual, anti-Semites. But the other thing is, like, in defense of this, the New South Wales Premier, let me find what he said because it's insane.
Oh, the remarkable thing about
he just completely said what he said the quiet part out loud, and
you can't have multiculturalism and free speech, so we're cancelling free speech.
Yeah. So what did he say? He said, repealing hate speech laws would send a toxic message to the community. I'm trying to find.
Well, that was basically it. What I said.
Goes,
it's basically said it's incompatible.
Here it is. I've got the direct quote. Australians don't have the same freedom of speech laws that they have in the United States, and the reason for that is we want to hold together a multicultural community. So, as I said on X as well, he's accidentally saying the quiet part out loud. If a society needs to suppress open discourse to prevent fragmentation and hold together a multicultural community, then multiculturalism is inherently fragile and cannot coexist with the principles of a liberal democracy. Like, that's what he's saying, which is we can't have the very thing that underpins Western democracies because we are multicultural.
It's an absurd thing to admit. I mean, I don't know if he realized what he was saying at the time, but
that's the thing. Like people are saying, oh, he pulled the mask off. It's like, no, he's just a retard. And
he kept saying it.
Yeah. I'm sure he believes that. But
by the way, just for the ex people watching along, because I know they said Aussies versus the agenda. Put out a post recently talking about the AJA, the Australian Jewish Association, walking the corridors, lobbying for the hate speech laws. Now, there are some Jewish groups out there that have been lobbying for the hate speech laws, but just to make this crystal clear, the AJA, the Australian Jewish Association, has been arguing against the hate speech laws.
Yeah,
the AJA is the Jewish lobby they are the pro-free speech Jewish lobby. There's a different group. So if you want to be grumpy at a Jewish group, there's another one out there that you can be, but just, sort of aim correctly when you're angry. So the AJA is innocent on that regard. I'm sure you can find something else to be grumpy at them for, but we want to make sure we're not attacking people who agree with us and pretending they don't. It's they're doing good work on free speech issues. And you were saying that they put out a pretty good op-ed in, was it the Oz?
I think it was the Australian one, and they were basically arguing about how these crackdowns on speech will foster, like we said, more anti-Semitism, and play into the narratives that foster anti-Semitism. So everyone knows this, though. You talk to a lot of these MPs privately, and you say, "Oh, this is actually going to backfire," and they go, "Yeah. No, I know." Okay.
Now,
if only you were in some kind of position to do something about that.
Now, I think it's enough politics. I want to get into a policy idea, and today's one is
bring back the VR.
A little bit profanity. Absolutely, yes, compulsory.
Yes.
Things should either be compulsory or banned. They should either be subsidized or taxed. You can't allow freedom to exist in the middle. That's outrageous.
So free VR Commodores, but only if you vote for, I don't know, the Libertarian Party.
Now, I haven't tried running this topic past normal people yet. So again, it's useful to have you here to try and sort of normie check me as we go and try to help me work out the better way to say some of these things. Now, you'll remember that one from last time. By the way, our chat last time going to help. One of the ways we were discussing it, I then went and reframed some of my writing in a similar way to how we were discussing it last time. Put that up on X as an X post. And that seemed to get some traction as well. Not quite as much as your Hey True Blue. But so this is a useful way for me to learn how to speak human. I speak economics. My English isn't quite as good. They are different languages. So anyway, this is the official tax rates. We started with this last time, but we're not going to go as far. I'm not getting into the welfare side of things. This is I'll stop these graphs a little bit earlier. But here's the graph just to remind you. Along the x-axis down the bottom, this is how much you earn. So say if you earn, what's that? 41. That's $41,000. Then your marginal tax rate would be this. 16%. So the y-axis is showing you the marginal tax rate. So for the extra dollar you earn, how much you got to give to the government. And the x-axis down the bottom, your income. And you can see this is actually roughly what a normal tax system would look like, right? This kind of makes sense. You've got a tax-free threshold. And then at 18,200, it jumps up to 16%. At 45,000, it jumps up to 30%. At 135,000, it jumps up to 37%. And at 190, it jumps up to the top marginal tax rate of 45% and goes out into the future at that. Now, all right. As I mentioned last time, that's not actually reality. Even on the tax side, and last time I showed you how things look really messy with the effective marginal tax rates when you include.
Go to the pain graph.
When you include to the welfare one, you want to go the crazy one. Well, this was the crazy one I showed, jumping up and down like crazy. I'm not going that far. This time I'm going to stick with just tax. So remember, this is what they say the tax is. Even not including welfare, this is actually what our tax rates look like. Right, you can see here, this is a little bit different to what they said it is. And I just want to, this policy here is about addressing the anomalies in this graph, right? So you can't address them all in one video. It would take forever. It'd be too confusing. So just addressing the anomalies here. And you see in this version, you've got your taxes jump up to 16%, like we originally said. But then they jump up to 26%, then they come back down to 18, then they jump up to 23, then they jump up to 33.5, come down to 32, and then go back up to 39 and then 47. So you say it's a little bit odd. The thing that really sticks out in this one, this is probably the bit that sticks out, but the two things to note, or the one thing to note twice, is the previous graph was fully progressive. As you earned more, your marginal tax rate went up. Right, and that's what you expect, right? A progressive income tax system. This one has two regressive elements. So you can see at this point, if you're paying 26%, and if you earn a bit more, your tax rate goes down. All right, and then it starts being progressive again. All right, your tax rates are going up, and then you earn a bit more, and your tax rate goes down. So that is an oddity. Right? Those are two regressive elements in this tax system, which don't make sense. No one would do this on purpose, right? I mean, this isn't the goal. No one's trying to make sort of random little regressive parts of the tax system. But this is what we've got. And how do we have this? This is caused by once we factor in the Medicare levy and the low income tax offsets, which are just parts of our tax system, right? I mean, they're just parts of our tax system that have been named differently to, as far as I can tell, just so to trick people, right? It's just to confuse people, right? Now, the Medicare levy is just income tax. So we've got an income tax and an income tax, and all they do when they calculate your tax is put them together and charge you the tax, right? Medicare levy has nothing to do with Medicare. Our taxes aren't hypothecated in Australia, that the money doesn't go into one bucket that is only used for one thing. The Medicare levy isn't used for Medicare. It wouldn't pay for it, right? Medicare is much more expensive than the Medicare levy raises. So that they're not related. The Medicare levy is just an income tax with a totally misleading name to trick you into liking it. That is all it is, right? If we lived in an honest world, they would just put them together. Right, so the top marginal tax rate isn't 45, it's 47. And everyone kind of knows this. It doesn't take too long if you're looking at taxes to work this out. Right, that's one thing. But here's the thing, Medicare levy, you probably know the answer to this, but don't ruin it. Just play along with me, right? So what is the rate of Medicare levy in Australia?
Oh, I would believe it's as low as 2%.
2%, that makes sense. That's what everyone thinks it is. That makes sense because that's what they tell everyone it is.
And obviously they would never lie to us, and that is what it is. That's what you're going to tell the viewers, right? Which is that it's 2%.
Absolutely. Look, for most people, it is. For most people, your marginal Medicare levy is 2%. But for people earning between $26,000 and $32,500, so not rich people, these are low-income earners, earning between $26,000 and $32,500, the Medicare levy kicks in at 10%. So you've actually got three brackets of Medicare levy. Below that, you pay none. So a Medicare levy tax-free threshold. And then it kicks in at 10%, and then it goes down to 2%. And that explains this little bump here. I mean, that bump is entirely caused by this 10% Medicare levy. And then it goes down from 26 down to 18. And that's just because the Medicare levy has gone from 10% marginal to 2% marginal. Right. So in 26, you get that by the 16 is your tax rate, plus 10 is your Medicare levy, 16 plus 10, 26. Easy enough. And then it jumps down to 18 because that's 16 income tax plus 2% Medicare levy, 16 plus 2, 18. So that's the cause of this jump down. Now, the second regressive step here, that's caused by the low income tax offset, which again is just it is functionally the same as increasing the tax-free threshold. So you'll note in this graph, by the way, the tax-free threshold's out here at 22.5 now. It's no longer 18.2. So I go back to this previous graph, the tax-free threshold was kicked in at 18, roughly. And now the tax-free threshold's out here at, that's not very clear, but it's supposed to be 22.5. No, stop that. What are you doing? So that is what they advertise about it. I mean, that's the nice part of LETO. That's why everyone likes it. It effectively increases your tax-free threshold. What they don't tell you is, if that's all they were doing, then they should just do it. Just increase the tax-free threshold, right? The reason they use LETO instead is LETO also then introduces two extra taxes. And they claw back the LETO, which is functionally the same as just adding a tax. They add a 5% tax on people earning between 37 and 45,000. So again, not rich people, but they're adding a 5% marginal tax rate. And that's why you have this jumping up to here, jumps up from 18 up to 23, because this, you may have noticed, we don't have a 23% tax bracket in Australia. So where the hell did I get 23 from? Well, that's a 16% tax bracket plus 2% Medicare levy plus a 5% LETO related tax. You add them all together and you're actually paying that 23% instead of the 16 that you think you're paying, right? So that's this extra 5% LETO tax. And then from 45 to 67,000, again, not rich people, if you're earning between 45 and 67, you're paying a 1.5% LETO tax. So not a big tax, but I mean, it all adds up. And it's just, why are we adding extra taxes on people who are the exact people that we want to work more to get out of the welfare system? So these are the two anomalies we've got created by the silliness involved in the Medicare levy and LETO. Like, easy answer, abolish the Medicare levy. We all get a tax cut and go home. Sweet. I love it. Get rid of LETO. Just cut everyone's taxes. I love both. Of course, we've set ourselves the difficult task here, or the more difficult task of what sort of policies would make sense for a major party to steal. So we're trying to do it inside the Overton window. So on that front, I would love to just get rid of the Medicare levy. Truth is, it would decrease the budget balance by about 25 billion. And as has been explained to us by some quite savvy parliamentarians, they say, don't touch the Medicare levy. People like it because they think it's related to Medicare, which just goes to show the whole cynical nature of our politics. I mean, they name it something entirely disingenuous and it tricks people into liking a tax. But all right, living in the reality that exists. We keep the Medicare levy, but shouldn't it be a fairly easy sell to say, let's take away the 10% tax rate on the poorest people? I mean, that's the pitch here, right? Keep the Medicare levy, but just don't have the 10% rate. So you have a tax-free rate, and then you go to 2%. And just don't have the 10% rate. I mean, I would have thought that's a saleable policy. It would cost, what, $2 or $3 billion a year?
We got when we raised this, which was, well, it'll be cast as like cutting funding to Medicare or something. Was that?
Yeah, because people think the Medicare levy has to do with Medicare. So they think if you say we're going to reduce the Medicare levy, people will think, oh, no, I'll get less healthcare. The two things are thoroughly unrelated. It is just an income tax. And in this instance, it's a extra 10% income tax on some of the poorest, which I can't imagine anyone sat down and thought, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's just put an extra marginal tax on some of the poorest people in the country. The people who are simultaneously losing their welfare at 60 cents in the dollar as well. So it is, I think, an absurdity that we have a 10% Medicare levy on poor people, on people earning $30,000 a year. And the idea of just, we'll take away the regressive part of the tax system, take away the extra sting that we make poor people pay a higher marginal rate than rich people. I would have thought that's politically saleable by a well-spoken politician should be able to pitch the idea of, let's stop arbitrarily screwing over poor people. Now, maybe that is too hard for our current political class to make that case, but you'd like to think potentially it could be there. Could be there in the making. Now, it would still cost the budget because, you're decreasing that 10% rate. Government raises a couple of $1 billion out of that 10% rate, stinging poor people. They do make money out of stinging poor people. But yeah, it's still, the tax cut, the size of the revenue loss from this policy would still be less than Bracket Creep. So again, if you go back to that second policy that we put out, that we've got to give regular tax cuts, either index the brackets or give tax cuts at least equal to Bracket Creep every year. If they were going to follow that advice, they could easily afford to do this one year. I mean, you could do a new tax cut the next year, and this will be less than Bracket Creep. So you could do this plus something else. So I think that's eminently doable. So what about the second one? The idea of LETO. Now, the ATA, and when I say the ATA, this is one of my bugbears. I think the LETO, the low income tax offset, and its cousin, the low and middle income tax offset, are terrible policy. Well, I say mediocre policy, but I call it terrible because people like it. It's one of these policies that looks good instead of doing good. And everyone kind of sees that it's a tax cut for people who are earning just over the tax-free threshold, because it increases the tax-free threshold a little bit. And far fewer people notice or recognize that it's a tax increase, the marginal tax increase, right? They don't pay extra tax, but they're paying higher marginal tax rates, as in it's a disincentive to work for anyone earning between $37,000 and $67,000. They're the exact people we want to work to get off welfare. We tell them, go get a job, stop being on welfare, and then we just keep adding new taxes to them. We discussed the problem of incentives last time, and we do need to get these taxes down on exactly this group of people. And the LETO gives you a bit of an increase in the tax-free threshold, and then just increases the marginal tax rates on exactly the people that we're asking to go and get a job and work harder. So I just think that's the modeling I did on this actually showed that the LETO offers a tax. It's the only tax cut I've ever seen that might actually shrink the economy, because it gives a tax cut to people who don't change their behavior, and then increases the marginal tax rates on people who do change their behavior. So even though it raises less money for the government, it may actually decrease the size of GDP, have fewer people working fewer hours while calling itself a tax cut. So I understand, because the Liberals used to play around with the LEMITO, which is very similar to this, and they say, look at the tax cut we've given you. And the daft journalists, as I say, they never really understand the policies. So the politician goes and says, look, $1,000 tax cut. Not all $1,000 tax cuts are the same. Right? And so this one is a policy that is all about looking good and not about doing good. And as well as shrinking the economy, it also creates this regressive step in the tax system. So it creates this dog's breakfast. So the solution here, the idea behind LETO is to try to increase the tax-free threshold. Well, here's an idea. How about we increase the tax-free threshold? I mean, it's a convoluted way of doing it in such a way as to hide what's going on and secretly increase tax on some people and other people. Just increase the bloody tax-free threshold.
Yeah, just have the line go up later.
And what that would do is have the same.
I love that this needs multiple rounds of meetings with politicians, convincing of the logic of it. Then they've got to give it to, their own economic modeling teams. And then they've got to give it to Treasury to price this up. And then they need to think about the benefits versus the negative campaigning that results of it. When the solution is just make the graph go this way a little bit and then that way.
Now, the reason they prefer LITO is that the LITO has less of a revenue impact than my suggestion, right? So if you increase the tax-free threshold, will be a tax cut, as in the government will get less revenue because of it. The basic reason is LITO is got a higher tax-free threshold, but then it also has extra tax increases. And I'm saying we'll have the higher tax-free threshold, but just don't have the extra tax increases. So we're cutting taxes on people earning between 37 and 67, which, as Manoto says, they should be getting the same rate of tax, a lower rate of tax than what they currently have. So what I'm suggesting would decrease revenue, but not by an insurmountable amount. And as we've discussed before, we're supposed to be decreasing revenue because bracket creep goes up. But anyway, that's not the entirety of this suggestion. Increase tax-free threshold, get rid of the LITO entirely because we're doing what it was trying to do better than it can, and get rid of work-related expenses tax deductions. Now, I heard people's eyes closing, or eyes rolling as I said that. But bear with me. If you've done your tax returns, you notice there's always a bunch of questions in there. Did you work from home? Did you drive your car to work? All those sort of questions. I don't know if you do your own tax returns, Brian, and you've seen those. And then people kind of work out, what could I put in here that is big enough to save me some tax, but small enough so that the tax office doesn't come and ask me questions. And this is a pretty normal part of everyone's cycle of hell that is doing your tax return each year. Now, what I'm suggesting here is basically just get rid of all of those tax returns. So you're not able to put in those tax returns, which is bad for you. But in exchange, increase the tax-free threshold further. So it's a quid pro quo. So we're increasing the tax-free threshold in 2 times, or for 2 reasons. One, to replace LITO. One, to replace these WRE, work-related expense tax deductions. All right, let me see if I can find the right up here. So that's the 3-part. Now, what this would do is, see, I've written it here. Wait a second. I have to put this one up. I don't know if Brian's even seeing this now because he's not paying attention, but that's appropriate.
I tuned out. I have to admit, it hurts me. Not what you're presenting.
No, I'm mentioning the post that I've just put up on the screen. You still haven't seen it.
I'm looking. Okay. I'm looking. I just.
All right. Now, what I'm suggesting here, we could afford to then put the tax-free threshold up to $24,000 a year. So I prefer it to be much higher. As I said in a previous tax policy, we should be aiming to get that up to $50,000. But just in this small self-enclosed policy of fixing LITO, you could put it up to $24,000 a year, which is, as you see, that's more than what LITO does. And the reason it's more than what LITO does is it's also compensating us for not having these extra tax deductions. But when I say you don't get the extra tax deductions, our tax system is mind-numbingly complicated. The amount of tax offsets and tax deductions and different rates and different taxes you add on the side, it is complicated enough that it has made a fairly good industry for tax accountants and tax lawyers to be able to work out a way to navigate it all. So people often talk about the need to simplify our tax system. And this is a suggestion here. Let's get rid of a bunch of tax deductions and instead just give people a higher tax-free threshold. Just have them pay less tax to start with. You get fewer deductions, but you're paying less tax to start with. Right, so that's the trade-off here. So we're going to get a significantly simpler tax system, much easier to do your tax returns at the end of each year. Most taxpayers will benefit, not all, I'll get to that in a second, but most would. It improves the incentives for middle-income earners, which are the exact people we're needing to go out and get a job and work more. It takes away the regressive parts of the tax system. So basically it gets the trifecta of tax policy: increased simplicity, increase of fairness, increase in efficiency. Simplicity, efficiency, fairness. And all for basically less than $1 billion. Right, so this suggestion here is a bloody cheap one as tax cuts go. This would be very easy to afford even if you weren't trying to return bracket creep. I mean, it's for maybe $1 billion, maybe less than $1 billion, and you get to put up the tax-free threshold to 24. I would have thought you'd be able to sell that politically. Maybe I should have led with that to try and get your attention, Brian. But I mean, if you can put up the tax-free threshold from 18 to 24,000, and it only costs the budget a rounding error. I know $1 billion is a lot to you and me, but in budget terms, $1 billion is a rounding error. No one really notices it.
We give more than that. We give more than that to Ukraine as a rounding error.
I mean, they change the budget by more than that if the modelers wake up in a different mood. So yeah, so this is a fairly cheap reform, and it's one that hits all of the criteria that you'd want in a tax reform. Now, in terms of the benefits here, there is one group that would lose a bit from this. So so for low income earners, they would get a benefit of about $930. That would be their tax cut. But of course, they lose LITO, which used to be worth 700. All right, so you get 900, you lose 700. All right, so low income earners are probably going to do okay out of this. Middle income earners, a lot of them don't get LITO, so that doesn't make any difference. But a bunch of middle income earners do use these tax deductions, right? So on average, middle income earners use about $800 of these tax deductions. They get a tax saving of 800, but this policy gives them 900. So this policy, $900 better off. Low income earners, they lose 700, but 900 is bigger than 700. Middle income earners lose 800, but 900 is bigger than 800. So they are getting a tax cut. The one group that would be a bit worse off on this is worth pointing out, and then pointing out that it's not what we're trying to do. Some high income earners do use the tax deductions more than $900 worth. Right, so high income earners are going to be worse off under this, which is why this policy should be linked to a policy I will do in future weeks, which is what I call productivity tax cuts, which is tax cuts for the middle and higher incomes, which I think it's much harder to sell politically. It may be easier to sell politically if you link it with this policy, but it's actually the policy that would be most likely to kickstart productivity in the country. So we'll get to that when we get to that. But just sort of noting here, most people benefit, but some rich people don't benefit from this policy. Some rich people who use the tax deductions a lot would get a lesser benefit. But overall, most people benefit. The system is simpler. The system is more efficient. More people can understand it. And from an economic perspective, the biggest thing here is, I said before, that 5% LITO tax and that 1.5% LITO tax, just sort of draining the incentive to work. We get rid of that, right? And that's the thing we really want to get rid of. This would get rid of that while making most people happy. They get a tax cut, making the system more simple, making the system more transparent. Probably the biggest loser, some rich people will get less money, but the biggest loser out of this would be tax accountants who currently get a lot of business because our tax system is so bloody complicated. Everyone goes to a tax accountant. You waste that money getting them to fill in all the forms for you. So if we made the tax system simpler, which this does, then it'll be easier to do your tax return. And some tax accountants might lose some business. I will lose no sleep over putting tax accountants out of work, but I'm sure they're not going to appreciate it. I mean, this is a feature, not a bug, to make the system simple enough for people to do themselves and transparent enough that people would actually be able to understand the tax system. So then we'd go back to a system that basically just looked like this, except we're just pushing this orange line out a bit. We just push it out to here, from here to here. Maybe I should have actually done that in preparation so I can show it to you. But then it would still look at a nice, simple chart that everyone can understand. We've got rid of the regressive parts, and we've still got people a nicer tax-free threshold. So that is the pitch. That is the idea. This is our fifth policy proposal, tax policy proposal. This one's probably, I think, the cheapest one we've suggested, or one of the cheapest ones we've suggested as a rounding error. And the government that did it would be able to take the credit for... you're on screen big now, Brian, so you'll have to pretend to pay attention. The government would be able to take credit for increasing their tax-free threshold from 18 up to 24,000, which that on its own, if you just went to the people and said, there's a tax-free threshold, it's 18,000, we're going to increase it to 24,000. Yes, they're getting rid of LITO, but most people, they're going to pay as much attention to that as Brian is paying attention here. So you'll get away with it. And they say, yes, we're taking away some tax deductions. And again, people don't really pay that much attention to it. And so you just get to say, look, we're increasing your tax-free threshold to $24,000. I think that's a political winner, and it's an efficiency winner, and it's a simplicity winner, and it's improves the incentives. So that's the pitch. I've stopped talking now, Brian, so you're gonna have to start speaking again.
The other thing I got to say is I got to jump off pretty soon. So,
you son of a bitch! What are you here for? You're supposed to be normie checking me. You've just been sitting there buying your groceries.
Right. That's right. I got to jump off though, unfortunately.
All right, we've got most of the tweets coming in are just about you. Most of the messages coming in.
Oh, it's all love. It's all love.
Cora, that would be in the right direction. We did a previous chat. We were talking about getting the tax-free threshold up to 50,000. I mean, I think that's a doable goal for a major party. But of course, a minor party would be able to say do it much quicker, which I'm glad to see the Libertarians are doing that, pushing that tax-free threshold out much quicker. But anyway, one tax idea at a time, and this was the tax idea for today. Replace LITO with a higher tax-free threshold. If you know a politician who you think would be interested, yeah, thanks, Tyrant. Yeah, you're still paying attention. Love it. Anyway, I got to wrap it up there then, because it's going to be hard to have a conversation with Brian's forehead. But we'll be back next Monday. I think we're going to have a guest next Monday. I'll confirm it in the write-up on Monday. I don't want to jump the gun, but I think we'll have a guest to come in and talk about the progress in trying to repeal some of those anti-speech laws in New South Wales, given there's now an act to repeal those laws. So we'll get back to you on that. We do this Monday and Thursdays at 8:30 Sydney time. Work it out all the other times. This goes through YouTube, Facebook, and what's the other one? X, please, if you can, go and follow us there. If you're watching now, you'll be watching on one of those platforms. Go check out the other ones and follow us there. It just helps us get the word out, helps to make sure we accidentally get in front of your face for our future live streams and our future messages. So it's, look for Australian Taxpayers Alliance, John Humphreys, Brian Marlow on, I was going to say all three platforms. I don't know if Brian has a YouTube, but at least on two platforms for all of us, and YouTube for myself and ATA. So go along there. And also, if you can, if you'd be so kind, taxpayers.org.au members is what allows us to tick over here and keep the lights on. So if you wanted to jump on the website, go to the top right, membership. There's a couple of different tiers. You can join for, I think it's a couple of dollars a month or more if you have more. You can work out your own situation. It would really make things a bit easier for us. But I think that's it for us. I think next Monday we're going to come back and do a budget session. Bored or boring, Tyrant? Well, I'm trying to explain it to a 6-year-old. I need some 6-year-olds to come and join me. But it's, yeah, well, I mean, Ryan, you can come on.
That's it. Jump on.
Anyway, that's it from me. Thanks, people at home. And I will see you all on Monday. Ciao.
See you guys.